Here are 9 times people woke up at their own funeral. Number 9. The woman who woke up and then died for real. Just imagine a scene where you're attending a funeral. You're in a chapel with the deceased laid out near the altar. A relative speaking about the person and how awesome they were. Maybe it's a wife or husband with tears in his eyes, wondering why they've been left alone, when suddenly the corpse sits up and looks around all sleepy-eyed. Oh man, would you laugh? Would you cry? Would you scream in horror? When you think of it, this really is quite a bizarre story and must have been double trauma for the woman's family. One day in 2011, Virgiliu Mukhamidzyanov, 49, of Kazan, Russia, was going about her household chores when she had a heart attack. She was rushed to the local emergency, where she was unfortunately declared dead. Her body was taken to the morgue to be made ready for her funeral. But here's the bizarre part. While mourners were crying over her body lying in the coffin, she suddenly woke up. And when she found her loved ones crying and praying for her, she screamed. Of course, everyone else was also horrified, including her husband, who rushed her back to the hospital. But then, what could only be termed as a truly sad turn of events, Virgiliu's heart could just not take dying and coming back to life. She succumbed again in intensive care, where she was alive for just 12 minutes. Doctors once again confirmed her cause of death as heart failure. I'm seriously mortified for her poor husband and appalled at the callousness of doctors who wrongfully declared her dead in the first place. What kind of doctors were they? She might have survived had she been diagnosed correctly and treated in intensive care, but then again, fate can be cruel sometimes. As for her husband, he did not let it go and demanded an investigation. I would too, bet. Number 8. Body bag nightmare. Now this is another weird incident of wrongful diagnosis. Did this doctor go to the same school as the last one? Walter Williams of Mississippi got a short reprieve of 2 weeks of returning to life after being declared dead, and then died again 2 weeks later. Now that's some weird karma right there. Sounds crazy, right? But it actually happened. At 78, Walter Williams was declared dead of natural causes and old age. Dexter Howard, the coroner, who came and checked on him, said he didn't find any pulse and the man was dead. So, makes sense, okay? He completed his paperwork and then put Williams in a body bag to be transported to the morgue. But when they took him to the embalming room, to everyone's sheer horror, the bag started moving. The coroner was truly shocked after checking the bag, and he found Williams breathing again. Paramedics were called on the spot, and when Williams was hooked up to heart monitors, they noticed a heartbeat. He was back! Williams was released after a while, but unfortunately, he only lived for 2 more weeks. Williams passed away again, and his nephew, Eddie Hester, told reporters, "I think he's gone this time." Well, at least Williams had a good life, I'm sure. When the coroner was asked for a comment, he said, "Every case I do is a learning experience, and miracles can happen." Sure thing, Dex. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Give this video a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. Number 7. Matthew Wall, 1571. Incidents of people returning back from the dead go back hundreds of years, but one particular incident from October 2nd, 1571, really stands out. A young farmer named Matthew Wall, who lived in Brawing in Hertfordshire, England, was unlucky to have been struck down in the prime of his life, presumably because of an unknown illness. Wall was a town favorite. Everybody liked the good-natured young man. Needless to say, his funeral was attended by practically the entire village, with his fiancée accompanying the procession. While his coffin was being carried down Fleece Lane, which is near the Church of St. Mary's, one of the pallbearers slipped. It was a time when the area received considerable rainfall, and that made the cobblestone path a little slippery. When the pallbearer lost his balance, the coffin slipped from his grip and fell. The coffin bumped on the ground, and what happened then horrified villagers thinking they had just seen a ghost. Matthew woke up and suddenly started pounding on his coffin with his fists. The mourners were in shock and terror, since, of course, rural England in those days were a superstitious lot. They regained their composure and opened the coffin. Lo and behold, Matthew sat up. Matthew returned to normal life and even married his fiancée, who must have been the happiest woman on earth. To this day, the village of Brawing celebrates October 2nd as Old Man's Day, where they sweep Fleece Lane and ring a funeral and wedding bell, which was Matthew's final wishes upon his death in 1595. Whoa. Number 6. Funeral turns party. Who doesn't want to see a loved one resurrected like Lazarus from the dead, including the deceased themselves? Here's another case, when a sad Egyptian funeral turned into an all-night party instead when a dead man woke up alive. This time in 2012, it was Hamdi Hafas al-Nubi, a 28-year-old waiter from Naga al-Siman near Luxor, Egypt. Hamdi was declared dead after suffering a heart attack at work. 28 is pretty young to have heart failure. His family members thought he was really done for and truly dead. They even washed his body, and it was prepared for burial according to Islamic tradition. When a doctor was brought in to check the body for issuing a death certificate, as is the legal custom, he found that Hamdi was still warm, which was, of course, peculiar. The doctor then checked his vital signs and discovered to his amazement that Hamdi was still breathing. The doctor then quickly revived him, much to the joy of his mother, who promptly fainted when she was given the news that Hamdi was still alive. So all's well that ends well, and this was one funeral that turned out to be a rip-roaring party instead that lasted well into the night to celebrate Hamdi's resurrection. Number 5. What's all the fuss about? There was probably nothing more dramatic in Greece in 1896 than the news of a local bishop coming alive at his own funeral. The bishop in question was 80-year-old Nicephorus Glycus, working in Lesbos, Greece. On March 3, 1896, Glycus got sick and passed away. It was during the ritual of the exposition of the corpse, which is when a religious figure is laid in state for 3 days, that Glycus awoke from what he felt was just a very long nap. When fellow bishops and physicians declared Glycus had died, they prepared his body for a funeral. But before, as custom of the Greek Orthodox Church demanded, his body was put on display upon the bishop's throne in the great church of Methymne for 3 days for the local populace to pay their respects. During the daytime, people were allowed to visit the church, but at night, priests took turns holding vigil over the corpse. On the second day of the exposition, while mourners were walking past his body, Glycus suddenly got up, much to the people's horror and amazement. I can just imagine the state of the person who may have crossed his body at that precise moment. That would have been horrifying and a little hilarious. Glycus even demanded to know what the fuss was all about and why people were staring at him. Glycus was lucky he was a bishop who could not be buried immediately, but only after 3 days. Had he been an ordinary villager, he would have been a goner for sure. But just picture an old man sitting up and wondering why people are crying about him being dead. Number 4. Attending your own funeral. Syria has long been reduced to almost rubble due to the civil war, and the worst to suffer were, of course, the citizens of the country. In 2019, when a government airstrike killed over 100 people in Damascus, many were buried. One such man was Mohammed Rayhan, who went missing on that ill-fated day. He had been shopping at the local market, which received the full force of the blast. Rayhan was also a victim of the blast that was presumed dead beneath the rubble. Since his body couldn't be retrieved, his family organized his funeral without it. During the ceremony, who should turn up covered in mud and dirt but Rayhan himself? As you can imagine, the mourners might have had mixed reactions, ranging from being terrified to being hysterical to infinitely happy. Sadly, though, the same can't be said for the others who lost their lives in a senseless war. Number 3. Indian man comes alive at his own funeral. In India, hospitals are without scruples and think nothing of the customers, even going to the extent of discharging ill patients if the family can't cough up the funds. The problem is the poor state of government healthcare that forces people to resort to costly private hospitals that don't really see beyond a man's pocket. That was proved in the case of Mohammed Furqan, who was wrongfully declared dead when, in fact, he wasn't. In June 2019, Furqan from the northern Indian city of Lucknow suffered an accident that left him in a coma. He was admitted to a hospital in the city and remained there for days. His family had already spent over $10,000 for his stay, and then they ran out of money. When they revealed this to the hospital, the doctors then, presumptuously, declared Furqan dead the next day. Devastated, his family took him home and began preparing his body for burial. It was then that a family member was shocked to see his limbs start to move. He was rushed again, this time to the Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital, a better institution in Lucknow, where doctors found him alive and put him on ventilator support. The country's chief medical office took note of the incident and ordered an investigation, which is kind of funny considering the arbitrary nature of the doctors. A fat lot of good that would do. Number 2, back to work. Now here is a very close call if there ever was one. This weird incident occurred very recently, in January 2020. In case you didn't know, in India, Hindus cremate their dead, so it's no surprise that even if those who are wrongfully dead don't really stand much of a chance of being resurrected, because cremation is held usually a few hours after death or within the same day. In the Mashundai village of Karnataka, India, Malu Yalapapa Shogol, a 55-year-old woman, was thought to be dead after village doctors declared her to be so. Her relatives reported that she had been suffering from a fever, after which she was admitted to a private hospital in the village. There, her heart suddenly stopped, and so doctors declared her dead. Her body was brought back home, where the family began the customary prayers and rituals. Suddenly, to everyone's shock and surprise, Malu awoke and started talking to people. In fact, she got up and calmly walked away and began working on her household chores as if nothing had happened. Doctors could not offer any clarification because they had no clue what had just happened either. Well, I can't really blame them though, because after all, when a heart stops, technically you're dead. Thankfully, she had woke up before being taken to cremation. Now, that would have been a real tragedy. Number 1, Lady with the Ring. Grave robbery was a big thing in the 17th and 18th centuries, when thieves dug up graves to steal the jewelry and clothes bodies were buried with. But here is one incident where robbers were completely shocked and terrified when the body they proceeded to rob came to life. In 1705, Marjorie McCall, an Irish woman, succumbed, or so the doctors thought, to a fever that they felt was fatal. People in her village insisted that her body be disposed of quickly to prevent further infection. She was duly buried in a coffin without any possessions except a very valuable ring. Her husband could not remove the ring because Marjorie's fingers were swollen too much from her illness. When Marjorie was buried in the local cemetery, grave robbers made their move. That night she was buried, they came with their shovels and began digging up her grave. When they found the ring on her finger, they tried removing it but failed. One suggested cutting the finger off. When they tried doing so, you can imagine the look on their faces when she woke up. Apparently, the sharp pain of the blade cutting her finger shocked her body into waking up from what might have been a coma. The grave robbers fled the area, thinking it was her ghost, and Marjorie, in that muddy and dirty condition, made her way home. But here is the biggest twist in the tale. When Marjorie's husband opened the door, he was so shocked, he had a heart attack and fell dead on the spot. And the next day, it was her husband who was buried in the grave meant for her instead. Marjorie remarried and lived happily ever after. Now, wasn't that ironic? Thanks for watching. What do you think of these people who woke up from the dead? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!